How Boris became PM. The 19th of May 2019. Take your mind back to before Theresa May announced her decision to resign as Prime Minister. The bookies had Boris on 30%, with Hunt much closer than he is today on 9%. On the one hand, Boris was the man who in part helped to deliver Brexit. But on the other, he was also the man used as the scapegoat for all the Tory infighting that made it impossible for Theresa May to deliver her deal. He lied about the £350 million a week on the side of a bus. He was quoted as saying the F word, business. He joined Michael Gove in criticising the Confederation of British Industries, warning about the economic impact of Brexit. So for some Remainers, or more cautious Brexiteers, he was the epitome of a reckless populist leaver. As well as that, he represented the old guard that David Cameron was part of, the Etonian elite. But at the same time, he was known as Bojo the Clown, the man who often looked foolish in public. Even before May announced her resignation, Boris looked unstoppable. They knew of his lies, laziness and narcissism, but they didn't care. But instead of trying to talk only to his ERG brand of the Conservative Party, there was talk of him teaming up with more centrist liberals like Amber Rudd in a bid to court One Nation Conservative MPs. Even Ruth Davidson, the popular Scottish Tory, said she was willing to work with Boris Johnson. Don't forget Scotland voted to remain back in 2016, yet this, obviously more liberal approach was paying off. There was deep concern that a hardline Brexiteer was on the brink of becoming Prime Minister, as Boris Johnson kept picking up endorsements. Theresa May had officially resigned as Prime Minister, with Boris Johnson being the favourite. Bookies had him on 40% already, with Jeremy Hunt on a measly 8%. By the 25th of May, the Stop Boris campaign was launched by Conservative MPs, aimed at stopping Boris Johnson leading the country out of the EU without a deal. It was announced that Boris would leave the EU on the 31st of October, deal or no deal. Even the Brexiteers turned against Boris, with Nigel Farage saying that he didn't trust Boris because he backed Theresa May's deal in the end. All the other candidates had committed to a TV debate on Channel 4. Boris Johnson, however, could not commit himself. However, the bookies slashed the odds on him becoming PM to 55%, with Jeremy Hunt was on a meagre 8%. What worked in Boris's favour was the other hardline Brexiteers in the Tory Leadership Contest that distracted other Remain plotters from stopping Boris. By the 29th of May, Boris's hopes of becoming Prime Minister came crashing down as he was ordered to appear in court over his £350 million a week claim he printed on the side of a bus. The bookies put his chances down to 38%, still well above anybody else. Furious supporter Jacob Rees-Mogg compared it to a totalitarian regime. Donald Trump was wading into the Tory Leadership Contest, saying Boris Johnson would do a very good job. Boris's impression-worthy characteristics were compared to the likes of Thatcher and Churchill. By the 2nd of June, the bookies had Boris at one of the lowest points throughout the campaign at just 35%, as he was falling out with key Tory moderates like Amber Rudd. There were reports that he met with Rudd at a private dinner in a bid to create a Leave a Remain a Tory coalition, or BAMBA as it was called, but talks collapsed after Boris's refusal to rule out a no deal. By the 3rd of June, Trump was coming on his state visit to the UK, and he once again was backing Boris and Farage. Strangely, however, perhaps to keep out of the media scrutiny, Boris refused to meet with the president. Of course, just because Boris supported leaving the EU no holds barred by the 31st of October doesn't mean that he would make a good Prime Minister, with just 23% of Tory voters from 2017 thinking that he would make a good Prime Minister. By the 6th of June, however, as hardline Brexiteer rival Dominic Raab was coming out with comments about proroguing Parliament, Boris was gaining a lead of 60%, according to the bookies, and Hunt on 13%. There was even talk of him not having to face a vote in the Tory membership just so that he could get on with being Prime Minister as soon as possible. By the 8th of June, that £350 million a week court case was thrown out by the court as Johnson was threatening to hold back the divorce payments to get a better deal with the EU. Boris was riding high with a 71% chance of becoming Prime Minister, according to the bookies, with Hunt on just 22%. His campaign was being organised ruthlessly to eliminate his media appearances and minimise the potential of gaffes. Boris was trying to appeal to his core Tory MP voters by promising a tax cut for the wealthy. That, plus his failure to face media scrutiny, echoed Theresa May's election campaign back in 2017, and that meant that the bookies thought him less likely to become Prime Minister, as his odds fell back down to 65%. Hunt, meanwhile, was still riding high at 20%. By the 12th, in response, Johnson had officially and belatedly launched his bid to become Prime Minister, vowing to deliver super-fast Brexit and boasting of his former success as London Mayor. Unsurprisingly, Boris topped the first ballot of Tory MPs, winning 114 votes. The battle now for the Tory party was whether to allow the obvious front-runner to become PM unopposed and face a similar fate to Theresa May did from her leadership election, or to allow him to face scrutiny but destroy the party's reputation from Tory infighting. Of course, because Brexit was such a contentious issue, it was decided that it was better to debate the subject properly in a full leadership contest, even though it was mostly ceremonial. By the 15th of June, the bookies had him already on a whopping 88%, with Hunt on just 8%, as even Brexiteer rival contenders were backing him. The 16th of June was the Tory leadership debate on Channel 4, which Boris didn't attend. Why? Well, precisely the same reason why the Tory party, in part, didn't want to run the contest itself. They didn't want to broadcast Tory infighting. But also, perhaps because Channel 4 was a much more Remain-friendly news organisation, more likely to aid Boris's gaffes and make more Liberal candidate Rory Stewart come out on top. As it so happens, he did. But it didn't hurt Boris by not attending, as even former contender Matt Hancock was now backing Boris. The second ballot saw Boris win again by 126 votes, as there was talks about who might give up the race in order to give votes to a more Liberal second-place candidate who is against a No Deal. It turns out that neither Sajid Javid, Michael Gove, Rory Stewart or Jeremy Hunt did any of that. After the BBC debate and after Raab's defeat, it was now backing Boris, and support for Rory Stewart fell by the wayside, or was it only temporary anyway? The bookies had Jeremy Hunt climbing to 17%, but Boris was also on top at a whopping 95%. Gove and Javid were also still in the race. But just because Boris was on top doesn't mean that his ideas couldn't face scrutiny. He wanted a transition period in the event of a No Deal Brexit, but EU leaders dismissed this option, stating that the UK would have to accept Theresa May's withdrawal agreement first if it wanted a transition period. There were reports of votes being given to Hunt and Javid to oust Brexiteer rival Gove, but Sajid Javid was the loser in the fourth round of voting. Then, by a whisker, Jeremy Hunt claimed a lead over Michael Gove, making Hunt and Boris the final two candidates. The 21st, however, saw a massive blow to the Boris campaign, as shouting was heard inside Boris Johnson and his girlfriend's home. Despite being at a high of 95%, this altercation would see his chance of becoming PM fall 10% over the coming days. But it wasn't enough to hurt him, as news came out over the intention of his neighbours who recorded the altercation. Of course, the incident did question his character, whether he could handle stressful situations, and whether he was a violent, aggressive man. By the 24th of June, the campaign was getting desperate and nasty. Jeremy Hunt was calling Boris Johnson a coward for refusing to turn up to TV debates. Boris was posting suspiciously faked photos of him and his girlfriend, then agreeing to secret, last-minute BBC interviews. But Boris managed to help the news blow over, making regular appearances in the media, even stating his hobby of painting model buses. By the 26th of June, Hunt was on 17% and Johnson was riding back up to 90% according to the bookies. He was pushing for a points-based immigration system based on Australia's model for immigration. He, however, refused to rule out proroguing Parliament to force through a No Deal Brexit. Johnson ruled out a hard border in Northern Ireland and said he would seek maximum facilitation arrangements around the border. Despite riding on a high of 89% to be the next Tory leader, there was talk that if his MPs don't support him, that he might actually never be PM if he can't command a majority in the House of Commons, or if he faces a no confidence vote. The Tories were split, as Boris was saying do or die to Brexit. May was saying that Britain must leave the EU with a good deal. He was winning support in the anti-Sadiq Khan vote, pledging to increase stop and search powers to tackle knife crime. Of course, he was also winning support in the Brexit vote, claiming the Tories would be wiped out if it failed to deliver Brexit. By now, the campaigns turned towards pledging money as Boris looked to heal Britain by delivering a good Brexit. Some were pontificating that if he delivers Brexit, he should call a general election when the Tories would be at their peak. Labour would have to find a policy, and the Brexit Party would be somewhat redundant. But that is, if he can deliver Brexit. There were reports that when he was Foreign Secretary, he was blocked access to certain intelligence, although he denied it. It didn't hurt his chances, however, with Jeremy Hunt way down at 13% according to the bookies, and Johnson still up at 89%. Boris was of course a different sort of Prime Minister to the ones we'd had before. That may have made him popular, but of course he was also a Prime Minister at a different time to ones we'd had before. Some believed he would lose a vote of no confidence to Corbyn. When the American ambassador's anti-Trump views were leaked in the ITV debate, Boris refused to defend him. A future Prime Minister refusing to defend the civil service just to uphold the special relationship post-Brexit? Did it hurt his chances? No, but it might make it harder for him to keep his civil service on side in the future. By now, it was plain sailing. Hunt was on 9% and dropping. Boris was on well over 95% and rising. Of course, Boris was forced by the Tories to humiliatingly support Ambassador Kim Darroch. While despite his humiliation, Tories like Amber Rudd were now supporting a No Deal Brexit in a bid for a place in his cabinet. He was forced to admit his mistake over the ambassador's affair. He was heckled at Hustlings for not answering the question. The reporter who Boris Johnson threatened to beat up 30 years ago demanded an apology. He condemned Trump's go back home remarks, but it was announced one of his first moves would be to set up a trade deal with the president. He was still planning to suspend Parliament. On her final speech, May made a coded attack on Boris and criticised Brexit absolutists. He said 3 years under Theresa May will seem like a bad dream once he's Prime Minister. Brussels was offering Boris an extension on a no-deal Brexit. He pledged to be the most pro-business Prime Minister ever. By now, he had a 99% chance of becoming Prime Minister. He offered a can-do attitude to Brexit. It was announced, unsurprisingly, that he won the Prime Ministerial post. But given all the infighting from both the Tory party and the civil service, scandals cooked up from his own gaffes and all the media scrutiny against him, is it any wonder confidence in this Prime Minister is low? He might be able to defeat all the challenges against him and come through a Tory leadership contest with a resounding victory, but those challenges, and indeed those challengers, still exist in the party. A Tory leadership contest is therefore relatively easy compared to his main challenge to deliver Brexit. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.